think Boris, along with many people on the who campaigned to leave, were surprised by winning the referendum, actually. And then Boris, of course, I think was surprised that David Cameron stood down as Prime Minister, and then that there was a leadership election, and then that Michael Gove didn't support him, and then that he was made Foreign Secretary. So by the time he became Foreign Secretary, he was one very surprised person after all those things.
Let's discuss some of the morning stories, including this one, of course, with a former Conservative leader and former Foreign Secretary William Hague. Good morning, William.
Good morning.
And former Scottish Labour leader Kezia Dugdale. Morning, Kezia.
Good morning.
So the evacuation from Sudan, first of all, there have been developments this morning, of course, but the Times' leader today, written before that, is critical of the Foreign Office's response and the fact that the diplomatic staff were first to leave, saying that the Foreign Office appears to have lost its ability to look round corners. William Hague, is that fair?
No, I don't think so. Not from what I've seen so far. These are very difficult situations. I oversaw evacuations from Egypt and Libya in 2011. We had quite a lot of criticism of the Foreign Office at that time, but we did in the end get everybody out safely who wanted to come out, and that is the main thing, to get them out safely. Rather than to do so at the wrong time or in a rush or when you put them in more danger. So I think we'll be able to see over time how successful this operation is, of course. But if what they've been doing is working out where everybody is and who everybody is, and then negotiating a ceasefire, it does seem like the UK has been part of negotiating a ceasefire, and now, during a ceasefire, are going to ask people to come to aircraft. Well, that is the logical order in which to do it. That is looking around corners, actually. So I think we can easily rush to harsh criticism when this is a very difficult and dangerous situation in which you can easily put people in more danger if you're not careful. So I would give them some time to show what they can do.
I mean, what you're saying about waiting for a window of opportunity or a ceasefire or whatever makes complete sense. I suppose the criticism appeared to be coming yesterday when I was listening to the radio from people saying, well, other countries have managed to get their nationals out more quickly.
Yes, that's often a point made, and of course, then there are other countries that haven't done that, but they don't get mentioned. And then a lot of those countries that have airlifted people out have smaller numbers involved than the UK, because here you've got potentially thousands of people. There are a lot of dual nationals in the case of Britain and a country like Sudan. So much larger numbers potentially available. One thing I would say, one suggestion, as it was, I always found in these things that you had to have more aircraft available than you ever thought necessary at the beginning, because they break down, because some people are late, and so you actually have to over-provide. You have to listen to the military and the officials as to how many aircraft they need, and then you have to say, well, actually, we're going to send more than that. And you have to overcompensate for the situation. So I would suggest that to ministers now. But otherwise, I would be very reluctant to criticize an operation under very difficult circumstances, as I say, where you can easily accidentally put people in greater danger if you're not careful.
Kezia, what do you make of what's happened so far?
Well, there's no doubt the aesthetics are absolutely awful, starting with diplomatic staff not being in country when the crisis really seemed to escalate over the weekend. I spent a bit of time yesterday listening to stories from people in country, or reading from stories from people in country who are absolutely petrified. One woman, Roseanne Ahmed, travelled to Sudan for a family funeral and then is now stuck, can't get out, is absolutely petrified in Khartoum with no water, no electricity, and feels abandoned by the UK government. There's no escaping that the aesthetics are really quite awful. I do understand that the United Kingdom might have more citizens there than other European neighbours, and they want to have safe passages and routes out and require more aircraft to do so. But because we've been so slow to respond, or it looks like we've been so slow to respond, I now struggle to see how those people can get to the airport safely when there's so much focus now on the fact that they will be leaving the country. So it looks like an awful mess, and that we've learned very little from what happened in Afghanistan.
Let's look at William's column today. William, you argue in your column today that the selection process for politicians is failing us when it comes to ensuring the best candidates are representing us. Rebut the charge, William Hague, that you are just a dyed-in-the-wool elitist. You just want a bunch of technocratic elites running this country, not doughty citizens of the local constituency who they profess to serve.
No, maybe I am a dyed-in-the-wool elitist, and don't see too much wrong with that. You do need some elite people in Parliament. And of course, it's very important that politicians are responsive to local issues. Indeed, we need to strengthen local government and devolution across the United Kingdom so people have more accountability for local decisions. But my point in my column is that Parliament isn't just a gathering of local representatives, each to put forward their local case. It is the national deliberative assembly to act in the best interests of the whole country. And unless it acts in that way, you can all say locally, we don't want more housing built in our area. And you don't meet the national need for doing so. And that can be true of nuclear power stations or many other things. And so the trend to choose candidates, and it is a strong trend at the moment across many of the political parties, to say, oh, you've got to be local, can shut out some very talented people who will contribute to those national and international decisions and who would be very good representatives of that area anyway. If you're not born in an area where your party is likely to win, or you can't afford to move to such an area, or you're leading a very mobile life, you end up not being selected as the local candidate. And I think that's a worrying trend that hasn't been called out enough on in our national media. That's why I've written that column today.
Could you have a strange utopian world where you have local constituency MPs and then you have a sort of 50-strong nationally elected super elite who are there to just weigh in on weighty issues? I can see the prospects for conflict here, but there's something you're trying to say here where you should be elected for your national interest rather than your local interest. Is that possible to split up types of MPs even?
It's difficult to do. I mean, some countries do have a split electoral system, like Germany, where half the members are elected for individual constituencies and the other half are elected from party lists. Although that's not exactly aligned with the purpose that you just described, but you could say that is a form of that. And at the moment, what happens in our system is there are some constituencies where they say, well, we just want somebody who's going to be very, very good nationally or internationally. And they'll be good locally anyway. I mean, my old constituency, when they chose Rishi Sunak, said that explicitly. Yeah. You know, he's not local at all, but he's so good, we're going to choose him, and he'll do well for us and the country. But there are too many other constituencies now that say we've got to have somebody who was born and brought up here. Which, as I say, starts to narrow the choice. So you could do that. That sort of electoral system in Germany maybe is a bit of that. But in Britain, we're relying on the constituencies to do it. And that isn't working well enough now. It's
a really interesting point. Kezia, what do you make of this? That no more local people for local constituents. Do you think there's an argument here?
Well, first of all, it's great to hear that William's a convert to proportional representation, because of course that is the answer here.
I didn't say that. I was pointing out the effect of that.
You're steering very close to it, and I think you should give it a closer attention. You described the situation in Germany there. New Zealand is another example to look at, where they have a national list that allows political parties to put their brightest and best forward for that national list. It allows them to ensure that they've got, for example, leading farmers, great scientists, people from different business backgrounds on their party list to offer that whole roundedness to the electorate. But more seriously, I agree with William's diagnosis of the problem. I'm not sure I agree with the treatment. We do have a political class or a set of politicians who just don't have enough time now to focus on the big problems, like how to build the houses that we need, or indeed the demographic time bomb that we now face as a country, because their existence is so focused now on essentially being applied social workers dealing with constituents' problems. And there's a lot of MPs who just want to do that, and we should respect that, because actually there's a lot of problems and a lot of people that need that type of help. But my argument against what William's putting forward in his column is he starts from a premise that the brightest and best people want to be politicians, they just can't get selected. My experience is the best campaigners, the best business leaders, the best community leaders I know right now couldn't imagine anything worse than standing for Parliament because they think it's so toxic, because the discourse is so unhealthy, actually because they think it's going to be very hard to change anything or get anything done. I think there's a much more fundamental problem with our politics and functions at the moment, which is deterring the best people from standing. I don't think breaking the link between people and their local representative is the starting point in the problem from my perspective.
Let's move on and talk about Boris Johnson, who apparently had no plan for Brexit the day after the referendum.
Shocked, I tell you.
That is what we've learned today from the latest extract of Johnson at 10, Anthony Seldon and Raymond Newell's new book looking into Johnson's premiership. We've got no plan, said Boris, as the headline. Holy crap. Westminster insiders reveal what really happened after Boris Johnson backed Brexit. Make sure you read the extract in the Times today. It's in Times 2. Serialisation, of course, of the book. William Hague, does this stuff matter now?
Well, yes, it matters. We always have to learn from history, and there will be future twists and turns in what happens in our political parties, you know, how the Conservative Party develops in the future, whether it wins or loses the next election, where it's important for people to understand where they mustn't repeat past mistakes. So yes, I think it does really matter to understand the recent history of the country. It's not a surprise. I mean, it would be, the real surprise would be if it said in the book that he had a master plan and, you know, but kept it hidden somewhere. And didn't reveal it to anybody because, you know, there was no sign of any surprise. I think Boris, along with many people who campaigned to leave, were surprised by winning the referendum, actually. You know, and then Boris, of course, I think was surprised that David Cameron stood down as Prime Minister, and then that there was a leadership election, and then that Michael Gove didn't support him, and then that he was made Foreign Secretary. So by the time he became Foreign Secretary, he was one very surprised person after all those things. So those things were not anticipated.
Oh, goodness me. What was your reaction the day after the referendum, William Hague?
Well, I was a little bit surprised. You know, I was I'd left government by then, but left politics by then. But to the extent I'd been involved, I was on the Remain side, and I'd written that way in the newspaper column I was writing at the time. So I was surprised and wondered whether people realized the enormity of what they had done. But, you know, we're a democratic country. We've got on with dealing with it, but we are still, well, we're paying the price. We're increasingly paying the price, actually, economically in the country, and government economic policy has to be directed to compensating for that.
Kezia, clearly you're not surprised. No one is. But does it make you angry that this is what was going on?
Really, really angry. I mean, I was absolutely devastated the day after the European Union referendum. I was the leader of the Scottish Labour Party at the time, and was somebody who believed in unions of nations, unions of people, and couldn't believe that we had done something that was such a great act of self-harm, one that I believe that we're still paying for today, led by a politician that exploited fear and you know, enhanced divisions within society and continues to do so. It's been so damaging. I still really struggle to find a single solitary benefit of leaving the European Union, and only problems. I'm your ultimate Ramona in that regard. I'm not over it. I'm not going to get over it. I think it's so incredibly damaging to our country standing in the world and the rights of the people within it. It's the worst thing we've done to ourselves in my political lifetime.
William, can you find one single benefit for Kezia?
Yeah, well, I'm on the same side of the argument, but yeah, there are some benefits. Yes, there are. We can have better, more sensible regulation than the European Union of all sorts of things, from financial services to clinical trials. You know, as long as we get on and do it. I mean, we've been slow to do these things, but it is possible to regulate a lot of areas of business and science more successfully than the European Union. That's that will be the upside if the government can manage to do that over the coming years.
And we'll see if they do or they don't. Keir Starmer wants to bring in lessons for boys on how to treat women and girls. Kezia, we've been talking about this morning. Quite a lot of people get in touch then and say, oh, you can't stop blaming boys and it shouldn't just be focusing on boys. But, it's not all men. We all know that. But it's always men, more or less. That's the problem here. And this is about issues of respect towards women, which do seem to be getting worse. Whether that's true or not, you'll have a view. Is it the role of school to take on this more formally? Is it the role of parents? Is there a combination of the two? What do you make of this?
Well, I think it's always been the role of schools to talk about relationships and what healthy relationships look like. And I think increasingly in an age of YouTube and Andrew Tate, and not really fully understanding what young men are exposed to online, the duty for schools to try and offer some sort of counter to that is only growing. Toxic masculinity is a massive problem. We need to teach men how to be or how not to be bystanders. So when they hear content or they hear their friends talking away about women that's unacceptable, to feel like it's the manly thing to shut that down, to stop that rather than to play along with it. I think it's a really brave thing actually for the Labour Party to take this on and start talking about it. Because of the culture wars that we're going through just now, they're going to be open to so much attack here. They're going to be criticised really heavily, but that doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do.
Are things worse, Kezia? Do you think things are worse now? Because I was thinking that when I was a kid, there was no one ever talked about consent in school, in lessons, which is a bad thing. And I wonder whether misbehaviour went on, but people didn't call it as bad behaviour, or people didn't complain about it, people didn't refer to it as what it was. And whereas they do that more now. Is that true, do you think?
It's categorically worse. I mean, no, it's worse because of the recent report from the English Children's Commissioner that looked at what young people are absorbing online, what they think sex is like, the degree to which violent and aggressive behaviour should be used in sex and in relationships. It's so deeply unhealthy. The evidence is there. The question is, what are we going to do about it? And the answer is there has to be a role for schools in that, and there has to be a role in talking about what a healthy relationship is, what consensual sex is and what it isn't, and where those boundaries are. If it's not the role of schools to do that, and we leave it just to parents who don't really know what their children are absorbing necessarily online, I can't see the situation getting any better. William,
could you support this if this was sort of a cross-party notion? What do you make of it?
Well, I think it's starting a very important debate, and I think a really serious point is being made here. Unfortunately, it's part of an even bigger subject, an even bigger problem. I agree with Kezia that things are getting worse in this respect, but on an even broader front, really, yes, attitudes of boys towards girls, but the mental health of young people, particularly girls, as affected by social media, is also appears to be in serious decline. And so there's a bigger problem to deal with here, which is there's something fundamentally wrong with how social media is working. We can't disinvent it, but we're not going to be able to accept forever that social media works in this addictive and divisive way. And there's got to be a reckoning with the way in which it has been promoted and the companies that have created it.
But will that ever?
That's an even bigger thing. I don't think a small number of lessons is going to deal with that, but it's a good starting point to debate whether that is necessary.
Will that ever happen? Because are they too big? If you think about it, if you say to you, X company showed a picture of a woman being raped, you would say that company would be shut down. That company would not be able to do business. And yet all of the major platforms have done that. And yet nothing ever seems to happen to them. Nothing ever changes. And there's a fear, William, that we'll be having this conversation in 5 years' time and everyone bemoaning social media and how it's ruined our brains and ruined our children and ruined our lives. And then we'll have another debate in 5 years' time because some things are just too big for politicians to actually tackle, and that's one of them.
Well, I completely agree, but we can't therefore say, oh well, that's all fine. Then we have to get that debate going. If the online safety bill, when that all becomes law, that will make some progress on these things, but it is largely putting sticking plasters on the disease, and so with then a more far-reaching look is needed. But the problem is, of course, that it's global. And that unless governments work together across the world to deal with this, they find it very difficult. And you would need to reinvent the whole business model of social media. So, yeah, it's very difficult. But I think the problems being created are so serious that it will not be possible to say we just can't deal with it.
Interesting stuff. Gloomy, but I'm sure that's probably right. Great to speak to you both as ever. Really wise words from both you. Kezia Dugdale there, the former Scottish Labour leader and the former Conservative leader, former Foreign Secretary, of course, relevant today, William Hague.
And we got this email in earlier, actually. Can I add an observation to this particular debate? I am a lady in my 70s, and I was recently on a train which had an army base on its route. I was within earshot of a group of young soldiers who were vigorously discussing the merits of their various postings in the terms of the availability and flexibility of the women available in each town. I was saddened that despite all the equality gains in my lifetime, that this is still the instinctive mindset of young men, and it is unlikely to change. Of those particular men, it does happen though.
Yeah.
It does happen on trains.
Is it getting worse? That's an interesting question, because I mean, has it always been bad? I'm sure Kezia's right that there is this. I mean, there must be an impact, mustn't there? Social media and pornography must have an impact.
Yeah.
You can't imagine it wouldn't have an impact. But
No.
how many times have we mentioned online safety, online harm? It just feels like this impossible, overwhelming problem, doesn't it?
Yeah.